That's right, the Noonies are back, and I would love to thank our sponsor for this episode, Avast, who is a global leader in digital security and privacy, as you very well know, because they have over 435 million users, and the AVG brands are those that protect the people from threats on the internet and the ever-evolving IoT landscape. So thanks to Avast for sponsoring this episode, and I hope you enjoy.
HackerNoon Podcast.
Hello, hackers. Welcome to another episode of the HackerNoon Podcast. I'm your host, Amy Tom, and as always, I cannot wait to chat with you about what we've got going on today. We are recording a Noonies episode with Lomit Patel, who is the Senior Vice President of Growth at Together Labs and a best-selling author, which we will get into in a minute here. But first, I want to let you know that Lomit is nominated for 2 Noonies Awards. The first is a HackerNoon Contributor of the Year award in the Lean Startup category. And the second is another Contributor of the Year award in the Motivation category. So before we jump into it, I will let you know that I'm putting those I am putting those links in the show notes. Woo! And so you can vote for Lomit for his Noonies nominations. But anyways, hi Lomit, welcome to the podcast.
Hey Amy, how you doing? I'm excited to be here.
I am doing great. You know what? This is my first podcast recording where I am sitting down on a couch, and it has changed my life. I feel like a real host now, like I'm about to host like a real proper like Good Morning America kind of thing. So I don't think I will ever host a podcast sitting on a regular chair anymore. This is great.
It's amazing the sort of things we come to learn, right? It's like, I mean, for me, I would say, generally when I do podcasts, I like to go to like different places in the house because you kind of get bored of just doing it from the same place. Yeah.
Yes, I have always just sat at a regular office chair at a desk. And now I'm like, wow, you can literally podcast from wherever you want to. It's great.
Yeah. And,
amazing.
and it sounds like you're doing it from an exciting city that I'm pretty familiar with as well.
Yes. Today I am podcasting from London, which as a personal milestone, this means that I have podcasted in over 4 countries now, which I'm very excited about. But anyways, it's not about me. Not everything is about me. I want to talk about you today. So tell me first, before we get into your book, about what you do at Together Labs.
Yeah, so at Together Labs, I'm pretty much responsible for all of our growth. So that encompasses everything from user acquisition to retention to monetization across all of our different properties. And our most popular social network gaming app is called MVU, IMVU. And, we have millions of users. But I've been at the company for just over 5 years now, and it's been a great ride so far.
5 years is a long time, a very long time. What were you doing before that?
So previously, I've worked at a number of different startups. So my role has always been around the area of growth. And generally, I work with startups pretty early, usually when they have like a product or service out. And my role coming in is really to help identify, once you have the product and service, how we're going to acquire customers, how we're going to generate revenue, and ultimately how, every startup talks about that hockey stick growth of getting to millions of users. And my role is generally to help chart out the path on how to make that happen. So it's kind of a fun time.
Okay.
Usually coming in when you join companies early is that there's a lot of like green space ahead, right? So you can get super creative, you can try a lot of things, and there's always there's a lot of upside because ultimately nothing's been tried before, right? So you can generally sort of, if you keep, trying and experimenting with enough things, some of those things are going to start sticking and could end up becoming that flywheel for growth.
Yeah. Okay. I have 2 questions for you then. number one is, what do you consider early in a startup phase when you're joining? And number two is, why startups?
Good question. So my definition of early is generally a startup that usually is raised a Series A or is in the process of raising a Series B. And generally companies do that once they've reached product market fit, which a simple way to define that is, you've kind of figured out a product that actually solves a real problem, right? And there's going to be some demand. And so then the idea is to sort of validate that and start driving demand for it. And in terms of why a startup, I've always been fascinated working with startups from a young age. I used to sort of look up to all these tech companies and was just curious, like, how do these companies come from nowhere and they end up sort of disrupting the way users behave and act, and for the most part, I always look at startups as being an underdog, which is kind of the way I've always been perceived myself in life. And so I have that empathetic way of kind of looking at the companies the way most people have kind of looked at me. And the great thing about being an underdog is most people just underestimate you, right? And so working in a startup, what I found personally is that you get a lot of opportunities because all startups are, pretty much under the gun when it comes to sort of proving that their business is viable. And so, it requires looking to sort of scale up growth and try to ensure that the business is going to survive and not run out of money. And so, joining these companies early, you generally get to work with a lot of smart people. The teams are smaller, so you get a lot of visibility to work with founders and investors. But beyond that, you get the ability to really go and try a lot of things and there's a lot of there's a huge appetite for taking risk and trying things, and there's low appetite for playing politics, which kind of works well for me, right? So you get to try a lot, learn a lot, and in the process, you get to sort of get to know people who end up becoming a really big part of your network as you continue to grow and evolve in your career.
Yeah. Okay. A lot of what you just said just resonated with me too, because HackerNoon is the first startup that I've really worked for. And my favorite part is the visibility of like, I remember when I first joined, I would do one thing, and it was like something that was like a very regular part of the job, never considered it in previous roles, whatever. And then people would be like, oh, slow clap for you. You've done it. Great work. And it's like, oh, I'm really valued here. Like the things that I do really matter. So is that kind of reminiscent of what you're saying too?
Yeah, another word for that I use is the feedback loop is so much quicker, right? So ultimately, whatever you do, especially in the startup, if you're doing something good or if you're not doing something good, you're going to get to know about it pretty quickly. And for the most part, if you work in the right startup in HackerNoon obviously has a great culture. The idea there is not just about what you can do for HackerNoon, but how HackerNoon can kind of set you up to learn and grow in the process. So you're kind of codependent on each other, where you both are going on this journey together, right? Where you're growing personally and the business is growing and benefiting from your growth as well.
Yeah, definitely. So take me through more of your startup journey, especially at the beginning. Like, was there a period of time where you worked for bigger corp and then you like transitioned to realize that the startup life was better?
So what I will say is I come from a family of like of small business entrepreneurs. So my family owned some small retail stores. So I started working, and I was pretty familiar with kind of what goes into being an entrepreneur from that perspective. But in terms of my startup journey, I was always fascinated with that bent on technology, and what I found in terms of the companies that I ended up getting into. And the truth was, I didn't really know anyone in that worked in startups or whatever. So I was in London at the time, and I was seeing all these technology companies coming up. And so, my dream was to really come to the US, and the idea was sort of put myself in an environment where a lot of these things are really happening in the 90s. And so I came over for business school. And after business school, I just applied to as many different startups as I could. And I think it's the same for most people, right? If you really want to get into something, you kind of have to put yourself in the environment where those things are happening. And so for startups, mostly that's in Silicon Valley. And that's not necessarily true today, but at that time, that's generally where all the startups were really coming up. And what I would say is that I was fortunate to get into a number of different startups pretty early. Generally, what happens is once you get into one and you end up doing a really good job, then it gets a lot easier to sort of get recruited and get into another one. So some of the ones that I've worked at, for the most part, were companies like Roku's one that most people probably are familiar with, and it's become a huge company. But, I joined them as employee number like 30, but I was like the first sort of head of growth and marketing there. And that was really fun because, at the time, we, we're trying to sort of create a whole new category around streaming that nobody really knew about. And the fun part of that was just getting to work really closely with a lot of smart people, and in the process, just learning and growing personally myself by helping to really play a role in helping that company get off to a really strong foundation and get to millions of users initially before I moved. Then I ended up joining another company after that called Next Issue Media, which was a collaboration between all the big publishing companies, which at the time kind of saw the future being more in digital, and nobody was really going to subscribe to individual magazines. So they wanted to collaborate and create a subscription offering in mobile where people could get unlimited access to all the premium magazines. And that, long story short, I was, that ended up getting acquired by Apple and became part of Apple News Premium, which most people know about today. And then after that, there's been a number of different startups, but what I would generally say, the big pattern has been, I generally try to sort of identify different verticals that really interest me personally, because, if I have an affinity for it, then I'm more likely to be passionate and excited to work on it. And, I wasn't a huge gamer, but I joined IMVU like just over 5 years ago, but it was an area that I was really interested because I know there's a lot of people that were spending a lot of time on gaming, and in the course of learning that vertical, I joined this startup. This was probably more of the later stage startup where there was close to about 90 employees when I joined. Now we're probably closer to over 300. But what we did over that last 5 years, was to really take a product that was more heavily focused on desktop and web, and really turned it into a mobile first business. And a big part of that driving that whole growth strategy sort of fell into my team's focus. And that was fun to really sort of see the company transition into mobile and really turn mobile into a huge growth channel. And now I can proudly say that we're generally in the top 3 of the most highest grossing social apps in the app stores. So it's been a huge achievement doing that.
Yeah.
But generally, what I will say in startups is it's always good to continue to evolve yourself. And so, whatever job you're doing, always be flexible about, what's next, what's new, what to try to sort of think ahead of where user behavior is going. And so, when it comes to driving growth, it's all around identifying, what are channels where people are spending time. And so, a good example of that is social media. So, I was really heavy into social media before a lot of people started even spending money on things like Facebook and Instagram. And when I joined Together Labs at IMVU, we were one of the first early beta testers to get into growing advertising with Snapchat and TikTok, which today are huge, but at that time they weren't. And so it really gave us a huge competitive advantage to really get access to all these millions of users that were using that platform, to get them to sort of convert into becoming customers for IMVU as well.
Okay. So you've alluded to a lot of this already, but what is involved in growth? Like when you are a leader of growth at a startup, where do you start? What's involved? What's going on in your mind? Tell me more about that.
Really good question. With growth, ultimately, it's all about really understanding how you define success. And so generally, at least most startups that I've worked for, success has been defined as acquiring customers, driving revenue, and potentially what's the cost to acquire a customer, and what's the return on investment on the money being invested. So once you kind of know what your success is, and then it's all around sort of understanding, who's the best customers that are potentially going to be using the product, and then figuring out what's the best way to get in front of those customers ultimately, and what's the right places to either be spending advertising money or making tweaks within the product or around the onboarding flow and the customer, around all the different points of the customer journey to really be able to optimize the entire customer funnel, to acquire customers, retain customers, and to monetize customers. And what I would say is, outside of sort of knowing, how to define success, a big part for me that has really helped me in my role is just being curious. I'm always sort of I've been curious from a young age, but it kind of works well, especially in this role, because in growth, you always got to keep asking, you got to keep putting yourself in the shoes of the users and the customers, and try to look at things from their point of view. Ultimately, it's not about how the product benefits you, but it's about how it's going to benefit others. And how can you solve that problem, and how can you reinforce that value to them, so that ultimately, if users find value in what you're offering, then they're more likely to stay. But beyond that, they're more likely to tell their friends about it as well. So you end up getting that viral growth that goes with it.
All right. Well. Yeah. Okay. So you're, at the end of the day, what you're saying though is that as someone who is in growth, you kind of have to put your hands in all of the pots. Like you have touch with the product team, you have touch with the marketing team, you have touch with the sales team to help you to increase those metrics then, right?
Yeah. So that's actually the fun part for me in the job, is that you get to work cross-functionally with so many different other teams. It's not really about one individual team or one individual person. It's really about stepping up and sort of becoming that cross-functional leader, because ultimately you're kind of the cheerleader and the motivator for many teams, because everything that you kind of work on or you impact really impacts how other teams prioritize what projects that they end up working on as well. So it's a great way to get visibility, if you like that, in a company.
Yeah. So as you work in growth, what are you doing day to day? Is it a lot of like researching on what to do next? Is it a lot of just like liaison between teams, or?
it's a combination of all of those things, but primarily it all starts with kind of looking at the data and the
Mm-hmm.
metrics every day, like how we're tracking, to the goals that we need to hit, and from there, sort of meeting with different folks on the team that are responsible for the different areas of that entire funnel, to really understand what's working, what experiments are we running, what are we learning, because ultimately it's all around increasing the velocity of learning. At least that's the word that I use internally, because I don't expect us to know the answers, but to at least follow the process, and to try and figure out what those potential answers are, to not only what's working today, but also to keep an eye on the future. So always trying to think like 12 to 18 months ahead in terms of like what could be the next new thing that we want to start experimenting with today, based on where user behavior and trends are going. And that
Yeah,
encompasses
okay.
really just talking with a lot of people internally, but also talking with people outside of the company too, talking with customers, talking with other folks in the industry to sort of see what they're doing, what's working. And so being active, I would say, in the industry at different events, and speaking at those events, it's a great way to learn and share on knowledge that you can kind of bring back to your company as well, and continue to keep just putting ideas out there and keep trying stuff.
Yeah. How do you, in your mind, simultaneously look at individual points of data while still keeping connected to like the overall picture of things that you're doing? Because that sounds like a lot of like high level and granular detail.
Yeah, it's all about trying to connect the dots. And I think, just like anything, when you do something many times, you start to sort of build more experience,
Mm-hmm.
and and you know I know a lot of people don't talk about this, but there's some intuitive nature to it as well, where your intuition kind of starts to get better at sort of identifying, because ultimately it's about you know look looking at that huge priority of lists and figuring out what are we going to focus on today, this week, this month,
Mm-hmm.
and this year, and prioritizing ruthlessly is really important. But the best way to do that is never to put the entire pressure on yourself, but make it collaborative. Especially internally, what I find is when other people sort of feel that they're part of the process of what gets prioritized, they get more excited to work on those things, versus sort of being kind of a top-down command, like, hey, I woke up today and I think we need to go and do this. So let's just
Right.
do that.
Yeah. Yes, and that I think also comes from like the startup vibes of things, right? Like that's not really a thing in big corp. It's more of the top-down approach, and in the startup culture, it's really like involving everybody in the process.
Yeah, and Amy, just to close a loop on that question you asked earlier. So I haven't really worked in a huge big company personally.
Mm.
The biggest company that I worked early on when I started, to me, it seemed like a big company, and I think we had like 400 or 500 employees. But what I found was generally, haven't been in companies that have grown to become big, but generally as things get bigger, you tend to find that your role tends to sort of, at least the responsibilities and the impact tends to sort of get smaller and more specialized. And
Mm-hmm.
so, for someone that wants to have less bureaucracy, and have uh, more of an outlet to be more creative, and learn and try more things, then generally, yeah, at least in my experience, the smaller the company, the more you get those types of opportunities.
Yeah, I think so too. Yes, definitely. Okay, so let's get into a little bit more about your book. Tell me more about your book. It's called Lean AI. When did you write it? Tell me everything. I must know.
Yeah, so my book, Lean AI, it's part of the Eric Ries, the Lean Startup series, and most people that at least in business and startup are really familiar with with the Lean Startup because it's been one of the best selling books ever, and the author is Eric Ries. The way the backstory on how I wrote the book. What most people don't realize is the company that I work for right now, Together Labs, but IMVU specifically, that's where Eric worked when he actually came up with the whole idea around the lean startup, because it was a methodology around test, learn, and iterate, and instead of sort of trying to put the best product out there and taking so long, try and put the minimum viable version of that product or service and just sort of use real-time customer data to iterate and try to get it to become the perfected product. But the idea is that there's never anything that's perfect, and everything needs to iterate and pivot as needed. And so he applied a lot of that methodology at IMVU. And so I was always fascinated with that book, and that was one of the things that I've enjoyed working here, because it's still the methodology that we apply. But what I came to realize, when we were trying to make that huge shift into mobile, you have to just move a lot faster and quicker, and there's just so much more data now that you get you have than ever before. And so what I was doing prior to writing the book, I was able to champion the whole area around artificial intelligence and really sort of applying how to use AI to really help us to get better, faster, and smarter, using data to really grow the business around user acquisition and retention and monetization. And so I started, what I noticed is, that there's only, at least at the time, this was like 4 or 5 years ago, only a handful of companies are really doing this. And these are the sort of companies that most people know about, like the Amazons, the Netflix, and the Ubers and Lyfts. But it's something that most people just weren't really doing, and it's kind of pretty hard to do. And so what we ended up doing was to sort of, stitch together a couple of different like platforms that kind of existed and made it work. And then I started telling that story at conferences. I started getting invited to speak. And the more I started speaking about it, and sort of, I used to write a blog post, and the more positive feedback I started getting, and it was, and the more that feedback that I ended up getting, the more I came to realize is that this is something, at least for a lot of companies, is pretty early, and something that a lot of startups aren't doing. And going back to my original philosophy around why I worked at startups is because they're underdogs, and I felt this is the kind of knowledge that should be openly available. So more and more founders that start coming out there can at least be able to apply this to help them validate and the ideas that they have for their business, as well as be able to at least get more smarter around using the data for growth. And so that was the sort of the background. So I was writing a lot around this, speaking a lot about this, and the feedback was positive. And then I got to speak with Eric, obviously being a founder, and he knew a lot about the success that we're having at the company. And I kind of joked with him that maybe this could be a good topic as part of his the Lean Startup series, because they've come up with a number of different books. And he said, yeah. I was surprised. He said, yeah. And he said, maybe you should write it. That's when the seed kind of got planted. And he said, you should come up with a book proposal. And I had no idea what a book proposal is. So I Googled that. I kind of acted like, yeah, I will. And I sort of Googled it at night. But basically a book proposal is like a business idea where you sort of outline the big idea about what the book's about, what are the different chapters that could potentially go into the book, and sort of map out kind of the flow in terms of like, what the book is, and what the different parts would be in the book, as well as kind of do some competitive research. Like, is this something that's kind of unique, or how's this going to be different from whatever else is out there? And fortunately, I wrote the book proposal, but Eric connected me with O'Reilly Media, which is a huge publisher, and I spoke to them about the idea, and I had an editor that was assigned to help me at least put the book proposal together and to pitch it, and they generally don't pick up a lot of books every year, and I think this was in 2018 when the whole idea sort of came to me, or 2019, and I was surprised, but they ended up picking up the idea, and it got approved as being part of the Lean Startup series. So, once they approved it, it was a matter of like, hey, here's a contract. Do you want to do it or not? And so at that stage, I was like, do I jump in or do I sort of sit on the fence thinking about it? And by then I thought, you know what, I'm going to just jump in and try and write the book. And I've never written a book, but what I will say is that writing, I've enjoyed writing, and writing, a lot of like content on blogs has really helped me, to at least warm me up. And so what I ended up doing when it came to writing the book, once I had the book proposal in place, it was a lot easier to sort of organize my thoughts around where do I want to focus in terms of chapter 1 or chapter 2. And what I came to realize is when it comes to writing a book, it's best to sort of write on things that you feel inspired about at that given moment. So an example being, I tried to start writing about chapter 1, and I sort of did chapter 1, chapter 2, but then chapter 3 didn't really interest me at the time. And so I sort of jumped out to and started writing like chapter 6, and then sort of started writing about chapter 8. And then so it wasn't sort of following the traditional route of sort of going in a linear fashion. So I started writing about different things, and for me, writing a book was a lot easier because I was actually practicing what I was preaching. So it wasn't like I had to really go out and do a lot of additional research. Research was more around sort of validating what I was writing, and then I was actually putting the content out there on the blog, and I was getting more real-time feedback. So that was able to help me sort of refine the content for the book by just putting things out there. And working with a publisher was really helpful because then you sort of have a timeline, and when you need to deliver the book, and you ideally get like a year. But I ended up writing the book because I was just so fired up to get it done as quickly as possible. I wrote the first draft within like 6 months, 5 to 6 months.
Okay.
But the way I ended up doing that was we ended up kind of creating my own personal schedule. So I was writing like 6 days a week, and my writing schedule was to pretty much sort of write at night. That's when I like writing the most. I'm not really a morning person. So I was generally writing between like 10 p.m. and 3 a.m. And so my sleep took a hit during that time.
Yeah, okay, I was going to say, wait, you stopped at 3 in the morning. Where's the sleep?
I know. So it's like anything in life. You pretty much, we all have 24 hours, and the question is, like if you really want to achieve certain goals, then the question is, what's the trade-offs and where those going to happen. And so for me, the trade-off had to come out of my sleep. So I was sleeping a lot less, which was tiring, I will say. Having said that, what kept me going was what was the idea that I could actually be, I'm actually writing a book that can really help, so many people. And that was ultimately the goal for writing the book, which was to sort of put kind of a thesis out there that other startups and founders can use to really help them in their journey to grow their business.
Yes. Okay. I have some questions about your writing style and how you structure your day. But first, let me just get into this for another second here. The scheduling of your life. Do you have fun time scheduled, or are you just like a working machine?
Really good question. I early on in my career, I was just the working machine. Now, what I try to do is work a lot smarter. So
Okay.
So the idea isn't about, I do work hard, but what I do is I intentionally put blocks in my calendar to prompt me to actually take mental breaks because I don't want to get burnt out on things that I work. And generally for me, what I try to do in terms of rewarding myself, I like working out. So, I try to sort of break out part of my day where I can either go to work out. For a while, I was really sort of into the yoga scene. So I was doing yoga. That was really helping me. And then beyond that, I like self-care in terms of self-care things outside of working out, eating, cooking. I also like getting massages and stuff too. So I always try to sort of get some spa treatment in there as well. So I try to reward myself for working hard, because ultimately what I feel is for me to show up as my best, I have to make sure that I'm taking care of myself first.
Yes, because like that overworking like culture is like a recipe for disaster, of burning out and like not being able to do anything. So yeah, I guess taking that time to quiet your mind with the yoga, with the working out, with the massages, to just not think about things. Important. Yeah.
Very important. And one thing generally, at least in startups, that there's this whole thing around the hustle culture of like, just kind of burning, kind of working hard, long hours and stuff. And I've been kind of through that. But what I've come to realize is ultimately, there has to be a balance, and especially as I've moved up and sort of become more visible as a leader. As a leader, you have to set that example, or else people sort of feel like, that they just need to be, just burning themselves to the ground working. And what happens is no one wins at the end of the day if your people aren't happy. So
yes, I think for me, prior to global pandemic time, I definitely more so subscribed to the hustle culture of like always go, doing all of the things, working 24/7. And then over the pandemic, as my mental health has come up and down as everyone else's has, it's more of this like, oh yeah, if you want me to do anything, then I have to do less things, less work sometimes, so that I can be my best self to continue working, because this mental health is such an important piece of culture of work that we always forget to incorporate into our lives, I think.
Yeah, I would say the two powerful words that people can use ultimately is the word yes and no. And early on in my career, and what I find with most people is everybody wants to say yes to everything, right?
Because you're hitting me in the heart. I am a yes girl 100%.
I was like that too. I'm a recovering yes addict, but for the most part, it was, at least for me, it was just sort of getting validation from what other people would think and about me. And what I've come, I guess, as I've kind of gotten older and a little bit wiser, is that I've started to use the word no a lot more than I use yes, because ultimately it's not about the quantity, but it's about the quality of what you can provide. And by saying no, it's enabled me and the teams and the people that that I get to impact to really focus on doing less things, but doing it so well that it has a much bigger impact than trying to do too much and not doing it as well. And in the process, it provides more of that balance where people are able to ultimately, the whole life doesn't just revolve around work all the time.
Yes, I absolutely agree. And I think the pandemic, if anything, has taught me more so that like life does not revolve around work. I'm not a machine anymore. Maybe I'm just getting older. Maybe maybe the pandemic has incited the great resignation in everyone. But yeah, I think mental health and working is so hand in hand and so important. So I'm glad we chatted about that too. So, okay, this brings me back to your writing style. So when you sit down to write, are things going through your mind that are different when you're writing blog content versus like book content?
So what I would say in terms of writing style, um, in terms of book, um, it really depends on which audience you're writing for, and generally I try to sort of put myself in the shoes of who's going to be reading this, and I would say my writing style has been pretty consistent for the blog as well as the book, in terms of I try to write things as simplistic as possible. So I don't try to use a lot of jargon and complexity to try and make points. I try to sort of keep it as simple so that more people can really sort of understand exactly what I'm trying to communicate. Because ultimately my goal isn't to sort of keep this to a niche where only a few people are going to sort of read my content. It's to try and keep it as broad as possible so I can sort of impact more people, and more people can kind of learn and grow and potentially adopt the things that I'm sort of writing about. So I would say my blog and my book content is pretty similar, and the benefit of what I found is using the blog content as a way to sort of test out content for the book, or at least when I was writing the book, worked out, because the feedback I was able to get from that was a lot of the feedback that kind of went into the final book.
Can we talk about more about your feedback loop of your writing? Because this is something that I think that you do really well, and something that maybe you can help share with other writers in the HackerNoon community or people who write in general. How do you get feedback on your writing from people?
Yeah, so a lot of times when I sort of publish articles, for example, if I publish articles on HackerNoon, after a couple of weeks, I would put that article on LinkedIn, because I have a large number of followers on LinkedIn. And generally when I put things on LinkedIn, I always sort of have some kind of prompt like, please, let me know what you think in the comments. And generally people have been pretty open. When you, at least for me, when I've asked for that feedback, I always get people writing comments. And I always love to sort of read the feedback on the comments and sort of incorporate that. And as well as the other thing that I try to do is I have, a number of people that I sort of trust in my network, who I would send my content to as well, and at least sort of have them sort of review and give me some honest feedback. I'm always looking for feedback where people can just be as transparent and raw as possible. I'm not looking for feedback where, hey, this is great, good job, kind of thing, because that doesn't really help you get better at the end. It's nice to know that what you're writing, but I always feel that there's always room for improvement. So I always try to sort of share my content internally to a small network of folks to get feedback, and then externally, I always ask for feedback on social media as well.
Right. Yeah. I think that you are kind of a master of LinkedIn. So, what else do you post on LinkedIn other than things about your stories? Are you using like the polls features at all, or and other things that you post, or what else is going on your LinkedIn feed?
Yeah, so I've tried to create this sort of cadence where I want to try to post one or two times a day on LinkedIn, and this sort of started probably like 4 years ago. And for me, it what it really came down to is I generally get up pretty early in the morning, but I love to read early in the morning. So I'm always reading, like, what's trending, what's new, what's going on in the industry, or different things that I'm really interested in, which is generally areas around leadership and startup management and just business trends in general. And so what I used to do is I used to read a lot, and then try to sort of send an email to my team or folks in the company that, hey, this is something interesting, check this out, whatever. And I started getting a lot of like positive feedback in terms of like, hey, thanks for sharing, this is great, because ironically, a lot of people don't share internally either, right? And so what came out of that was I thought, I wonder if people on LinkedIn might find this helpful too, And so generally, what I do is, like even if I read something that's a pretty long article, I sort of just try to summarize it into a paragraph or two. So I've really sort of, kind of just put my spin or my point of view on what I think is happening. And so I started doing that. As I mentioned, I usually post pretty early in the morning when I get up, and I post late at night. And what I found, not that I was really looking at this as a signal, but I started finding people sort of, not only engaging on the post, but they're actually writing back to me that, hey, thanks for sharing. It's been so helpful. Been following this, and my company did this, or I shared this with my manager, and I was just getting, what I found is that people found that content valuable. So I've continued to do that. And in the process, I went from, I think when I started that, I probably had maybe like about 1,000 connections. Now it's getting close to about 34,000. But, not that I'm kind of looking at as a signal, but a lot of that has really just come from word of mouth, where people have started sharing or resharing that content. And, for me, ultimately, what the value is really that I'm helping people. And so and so in LinkedIn, I generally I'm always reading a lot around all of those areas around startup leadership, management, and business. And I generally either share articles that I write around that content, or I'm happy to even, share content that other people are writing around that. But I sort of try to put my own sort of, a spin on it, so that, if people don't want to read the entire article, they'll at least get like a synopsis on
Right. Yeah. Okay. Wait, 1 to 2 times a day is a lot.
It's ironic. I mean, it's like anything, because I enjoy doing it, that I don't really see that work as work. And for me, it's actually, it's become more helpful, because now I don't necessarily share as much internally. I just tell people, just look at my LinkedIn, to my team and other folks, and you'll kind of get, the things that that's kind of top of mind for me.
Right. Okay. Yeah, you have built this like very strong community of people who trust you as an industry expert in like startups and growth and management. So that's great. Definitely. And it helps with when you continue to build content and write and be able to share that on a platform. So I think that's something that you've done really well, that I think a lot of the listeners and HackerNoon contributors can take a page from your book on.
Yeah. The other thing that I would say is, it personally helps me too, because I feel, the hardest part about anything is sort of taking something from your mind and communicating it. And so, people have different ways of communicating. And, for me, writing has been that outlet where I can sort of take these thoughts that are in my mind, and sort of put it into a place where it kind of helps me to better understand what I'm thinking about. And in the process of putting it down, it helps me to kind of go and edit and then be able to communicate that more effectively to other people.
Yeah, definitely. Amazing. Okay, Lomit, thank you for joining the podcast. I thought this was great. I had a great time chatting with you. If we want to find you and what you're working on online, where can we look?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having me, Amy. It's been great. I've been listening to your podcast for a while, so I've been a fan for a while, and now I get the pleasure of being on it. So thanks for the opportunity. I would say the best way to getting in contact with me, and I encourage anyone, if you have any questions around all of those topics that I write about, feel free to reach out. I'm always happy to share anything that I know that could potentially help somebody else. But the best way to get in touch with me, my LinkedIn is very active. So if you go and connect with me on LinkedIn, pretty much my name, Lomit Patel. I connect with anyone who reaches out to me on LinkedIn, as well as I have a blog, which is pretty much my name, lomitpatel.com. That's another place you can reach out to me. And beyond those two, if anybody's interested in checking out the book, it's still doing well on Amazon. It's actually, Amy, I don't know if I mentioned this, but now it's been translated into a number of different languages. So it's in Korean, as well as like Chinese as well. So it's doing really well in Asia. It's kind of picked up there as well. So, but the book is available. Easiest place to check it out is on Amazon. If you search for Lean AI, you'll be able to find it there. And if anything, there's a website you can check out for the book, and it's called theleanai.com.
Cool. Okay. Yeah, that is random. What a fun time. A little #1 best-selling author in Asia. Okay, cool. So don't forget that Lomit is wow, okay, English. Don't forget that Lomit is nominated for the HackerNoon Contributor of the Year award in the Lean Startup category, as well as the Motivation category. So you can go over to noonies.tech to vote. Don't forget to do that. Another thing that you can vote for, if you have forgotten, which I'll just remind you, is startups. So the Startups of the Year campaign we are also running. So you can go to startups.hackernoon.com to vote for your favorite startup of the year. And yeah, you can find HackerNoon online at HackerNoon on all of the socials: Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter. You can visit hackernoon.com to read all of your favorite tech news. And as always, stay weird, and I'll see you on the internet. Bye.
HackerNoon Podcast.